What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Tradin Jabs. I am Jack Jablonski, and joining me is Senior NHL Prospects Writer for The Athletic, Corey Pronman. Corey, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Well, we're about a week into the season, and the Kings find themselves in a division that's, pretty wide open, aside from maybe the top one or two slots. What do you think has to happen for the Kings to contend for a playoff spot and ultimately make the playoffs in the 2021-2 season?
Yeah, I would say it's an unlikely scenario, not one that's impossible. I think the division, as everyone knows, is not incredibly strong, and there will be opportunities for probably the third spot in the division. Somebody has to get it, and if you're the Kings, you can say, why not the Kings? I would think for any of those, for some of those organizations that are aspiring to get to that third spot, there's a lot of things that will need to go right. One of the things I would have said that needed to go right was Quinton Byfield needs to have a huge year. Obviously, he gets injured, so we're not off to a great start in that regard. But there's other ways to get there. They've had a lot of draft picks in the last couple of years, and you have to think of now scenarios, best case scenarios for some of these young guys, whether it's Arthur Kaliev, whether it's Alex Turcotte, whether it's Samuel Fagemo, or a couple of others that they find ways to help the Kings this season in meaningful ways, and for some in a ways that might be slightly ahead of schedule of where you thought they would have been a couple of months ago, to go with guys who are already on the big club. But you got to see progressions from Mikey Anderson, from Tobias Bjornfot, from Gabriel Velarde. You need some of the senior guys like Doughty and Kopitar to maintain somewhat high levels. And get decent goaltending too. I think those are some of that's a possible thing that can happen, but it's a lot of things need to go right scenario.
Absolutely. You look at the Kings roster and specifically the roster construction, and there's a lot of talk around it surrounding the organization and where to play the prospects, whether it be the bottom six or, if they think they're ready or, let them develop in the AHL. What is your opinion on, the upsides and downsides of having a prospect play in either of those roles?
It depends on each player and on the team's situation in that particular time. I'm not an expert when it comes to learning science, but I think just from reading various things about the ideal development environments, I think it's a rather common school of thought that you want people, whether it's hockey prospects or the analogy I always hear is to people, when you look at how people are treated in the education system, you want people to be challenged but not overwhelmed. You don't want to, if somebody has cleared a class, you advance them to the next class, but you also don't drop your kindergarten kid in a calculus class. And I think that analogy applies to hockey too, where I think most hockey people want to see guys succeed at a level, not just be decent, but really be highly successful and show that maybe they haven't mastered the level, but they've come close to that before you advance them to a higher level. If a guy is just a decent junior player, he might be overwhelmed in the American League. If he's just a decent American League player, he might get overwhelmed in the National Hockey League. So I think those are some of the calculations you want to make. And there are some other variables. There are contract variables that come into play in terms of the ELC, and particularly the free agent clock. Where a team is in their competitive window matters a lot too. I think you take a team like the Kings the last couple of years who I'm sure obviously are trying to win games, but realistically are not a contender. And you can take a more of a patient approach with your prospects. You have roster spots to put in, but you don't need to rush guys. Whereas I think if, let's say you're a team like the Pittsburgh Penguins and you're at the end of your competitive window, and you have a prospect who comes in who looks like they could help you win games, and they're better than the next best option, even if they're only going to be a fourth line forward, there's value in having him come in because he will help you hopefully win a championship, even if it's not at the most significant role.
You mentioned, bringing a guy that, might not get all the playing time, but there are advantages to having him on that fourth line, experience and so forth. how much value do you take into the NHL experience on and off the ice? Getting into the routine, seeing how the veterans work and what they do to prepare and tendencies like that.
Well, at the end of the day, when it comes to prospects, the idea is for them to reach the National Hockey League. We sit here and we talk about, we watch junior, we watch college, watching the American League or events like the World Juniors, like, oh, does he project as a top 6 forward, a top 4 defenseman, fourth line forward, so on and so forth. But when they get to the National Hockey League, which is the biggest jump from any level, whether it's from the American League to National Hockey League or college to the NHL, it's the biggest jump you can make from any level. It answers some of those questions rather quickly. Doesn't always answer in that first season, but you start to get real ideas of what you actually have when they get there. So at the end, when a prospect plays NHL games, that's the most important information you're ever going to get on a player. It's not the only information. And when a guy like C.A. Bjornfoot, comes up, he had that great first camp. He's 18, and then he goes back to the American League. That's not, obviously you have more data to work with there, but seeing that he's able to almost crack the NHL roster at 18, that's really important data that goes into an evaluation process.
You mentioned the development within training camp and how it can affect someone's outlook. Recently, General Manager Rob Blake referenced to the media that he believes several guys in Ontario this season are going to appear for the Kings, throughout this coming year in some facet or another. And on top of that, one of the things that head coach Todd McClellan has consistently preached throughout training camp is that these young guys that are competing and trying to make the Kings roster, they have to be elite at something. They have to set themselves apart from just being average or above average in every category. What prospects come to your mind when you think about what they could potentially provide for the Kings this season?
Well, there's a reason why Arthur Kaliev looked like he's going to start the year with the Kings, is because at least within the offensive zone, particularly on the power play, he offers some very high-end attributes in terms of his vision and his shot. I mean, that's a guy in that respect who stands out as he has a differentiating quality from the rest of their prospects. Looking through their farm system, I don't know if you're going to see a whole bunch of guys who match that specifically. Obviously, fans are familiar with Jared Dolan, the speed and the compete that he brings to a given shift, that there's a value for him in a certain spot in a lineup. I don't know if I look through their system and say, Fajimo or Akil Thomas are the apps, or Kapari are the absolute best at these things in their entire organization. But Fajimo brings a very, speed, skill, and scoring ability on the wing. I think Kupari brings a lot of, he has the ability to push the pace and make skilled plays. Akil Thomas has a two-way presence, not the greatest skater or the biggest, but there is skill and hockey sense there. And obviously Alex Turcotte has a ton of competitiveness in his game to go with the skill and the speed he also has. So I don't know if I think Kaliev, there's an obvious fit for him that you want him on your team. He's on your power play. If he's not on your power play, he's not being utilized. The other ones, I see a lot of more well-rounded players that could fit in a lineup in somewhat similar spots and in somewhat similar roles.
Totally. And, while we're talking prospects, obviously we're talking about the future, and we've kind of covered the current day prospects, but back in August, September, you dropped your annual pipeline rankings with the organization's top prospects under the age of 22 or 22 and under. You had the Kings ranked 5th, obviously very high with a deep pool. One of the guys high up on the rankings was this past year's first round pick in Brandt Clarke. We didn't have the fortune of seeing him in training camp or the rookie tournament out in Arizona. But what did you make of that addition to the prospect pool with the Kings?
I thought Brandt was an obvious missing piece from their farm system. I don't think they drafted for need. I think that Brandt Clarke on talent was a very deserving player to be the 8th overall pick in that class. But when you looked at their farm system going into the draft, really the last couple of drafts, there have been very premium forward prospects in their system, in particular Quinton Byfield, But in general, they have a lot, I would say, many more forwards in their system than they do defense. There was a guy in their system that they were missing as a player who you can feel rather confident that it will project as a top 4 defenseman in the NHL with the potential to potentially be a top pair defenseman. And that's what I think you hope you have in Brandt Clarke, who has an extremely high offensive skill level, great offensive hockey sense, good size. Whether he'll be able to play the NHL pace, I think, will be the question on whether he is a first versus a second pair defenseman over the long term. But that's a guy who is an immediate fit for them because they have other good defense prospects. I like Brock Faber, Helge Grans has a chance. Obviously, Mikey Anderson and Tobias Bjornfoot have played in the NHL already, but this is the ceiling guy. This is the guy you're hoping could be a PP1 guy for you, put up real numbers for you. And I don't think there's that other guy in that system right now.
And the last thing here before I let you go, the Kings, as we've mentioned, deep and talented prospect pool. We have the sexy picks and, Brandt Clarke in the first round and Quentin Byfields. Within the organization, who do you think that's maybe off the radar or not talked about as much could really surprise a lot of people as that person continues to develop?
I think a lot of these guys are on the radar now for Kings fans because I think they've become such a big part of the discussion around the organization. Like 2 years ago, I would have said Fajimo could qualify for that, or maybe some people might have argued in Nikhil Thomas or Jordan Spence, but I think they've emerged in the eyes of Kings fans as guys they've become familiar with. One guy I could single out would be a mid-round defenseman, because since we want to kind of go off the radar. Kim Nusiainen, who played with Kalpa in Finland in Liga last year, had a really excellent year. I think he had something like 10 goals, 25 points in 50-something games for them. Went to the World Championships, and at the senior level, I thought he looked like he belonged. He's an excellent skater. There is some two-way ability there, even though he's not the biggest guy. I don't know if there's going to be a ton of offense in the NHL, but I think his skating is dimensional. It's not an easy asset to get in the mid-rounds. If the guy has other things to go with his game too, which I think he has good hockey sense. And I think this is a guy who I think could be a regular NHL player, maybe a third pair defenseman. I don't think the upside is super high there, but I think there's a chance for this 4th round pick to play in NHL games, which is not easy to get. The other one I would single out would be their 3rd round pick from this previous draft, Kirill Kirsanov. He's a guy I've been pretty high on, and I think has looked excellent to start this year with Scott St. Petersburg. He's often been one of the ice time leaders for one of the better KHL teams to start this season as a teenager. Not like a really super sexy skill set, not the biggest, not like the dynamic skill type, but really mobile, extremely smart defenseman. I think he's going to have a big World Juniors, and I think he will become an NHL defenseman in time.
Well, I speak for all Kings fans when I say I hope you're right. Corey Pronman, Senior NHL Prospect Writer for The Athletic. Thanks for joining me on Tradin Jabs.
Yep, sure thing. Thank you.